The marble walls of Manhattan's Supreme Court echoed with whispers as Sarah Miller, an exhausted waitress turned engineering student, walked through the heavy wooden doors, her second-hand heels clicking against the floor, while reporters scrambled to capture the image of the ordinary hero who had unwittingly exposed one of Wall Street's biggest conspiracies by simply stopping to help with a flat tire. Sarah clutched her worn leather bag tighter against her side as she caught fragments of conversations around her, some speculating about her motives, others already crafting headlines about the waitress who brought down a billionaire conspiracy, her mind drifting back to how different her life had been just 6 months ago when she was juggling double shifts at the diner with her engineering classes at the community college, barely making ends meet. The crowd parted as Detective Maria Rodriguez approached, her face stern, but her eyes kind as she guided Sarah through the sea of journalists and curious onlookers toward courtroom 401, where her testimony would either seal James Henderson's fate or allow one of the most sophisticated murder plots in corporate history to go unpunished. Sarah could feel her hands trembling as she remembered the weight of the tire iron that rainy night, how the cold metal had steadied her when she first noticed something wasn't quite right. The massive oak doors of the courtroom loomed before her, now their polished surface reflecting the morning light streaming through the high windows. Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection, surprised by how different she looked in the navy blue suit Marcus Reynolds' legal team had insisted on providing. Gone were the coffee stains and exhaustion, replaced by an image of composure that felt foreign to her even now. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable as Sarah made her way past a gallery where her father sat proudly in his worn mechanic's jacket, a silent reminder of all the hours Shed spent in his shop, learning the intricacies of vehicles, knowledge that had seemed mundane until it helped her spot the nearly invisible signs of tampering. That fateful night, beside him sat her daughter Emma, holding tight to her grandfather's hand, her 7-year-old face a mixture of confusion and pride at seeing her mother at the center of such attention. Assistant District Attorney James Chen stood as Sarah approached, his presence reassuring after weeks of preparation, yet she could still feel the weight of Marcus Reynolds' gaze from the defense table where he sat surrounded by his legal team, no longer the desperate figure she had encountered on the highway, but once again the commanding presence whose face graced magazine covers and business networks. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable as Sarah took her place near the witness stand, her mind racing through the sequence of events that had led her here, the strange angle of the flat tire, the unusual wear pattern that had caught her attention, the way the titanium lug nuts had shown signs of tampering that only someone with her specific background would notice, details that had seemed odd but not sinister until she had connected them all. Behind the defense table, James Henderson sat with his own team of lawyers, his perfectly tailored suit and confident smirk a stark contrast to the evidence mounting against him, yet Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands as he shuffled through papers, pretending not to notice her presence. The same man whose text messages planning Marcus' murder would soon be displayed for all to see. The courtroom fell into expectant silence as Judge Catherine Martinez entered, her reputation for no-nonsense proceedings preceding her. Sarah watched as the court officers directed everyone to rise, the rustle of movement, accompanied by the soft whir of news cameras from the designated media area. This moment would be televised, analyzed, discussed across the country by morning shows and legal experts who would dissect every word, every gesture. Sarah felt a sudden surge of strength as she remembered Emma waiting tables with her at the diner, doing homework in a corner booth while her mother served endless cups of coffee to make ends meet. The same determination that had made her stop on that rainy night, despite being exhausted from a double shift, now steeled her for what was to come. This wasn't just about corporate intrigue or attempted murder anymore. It was about showing her daughter that doing the right thing mattered, even when it complicated your life beyond measure. As the bailiff called the court to order, Sarah straightened her shoulders, remembering how that single decision to help a stranded motorist had set in motion a chain of events that would expose decades of corporate fraud, save a life, and ultimately change her own world in ways she could never have imagined. The weight of what was to come settled over courtroom 401 as Judge Martinez prepared to begin proceedings in a case that would prove how the smallest acts of kindness could unravel the most carefully orchestrated criminal conspiracies. Marcus Reynolds, the billionaire tech mogul known for his ruthless business tactics, sat unnaturally still, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled from hours of testimony, his eyes fixed on Sarah as she took the stand, while his mind raced back to that stormy night when this young woman wearing oil-stained jeans had appeared like an angel in the darkness, kneeling beside his $100,000 Tesla without a care for the mud soaking through her clothes. The courtroom lights cast harsh shadows across his face as he remembered how he had initially dismissed her that night, assuming she was just another opportunist seeking a moment with the famous Marcus Reynolds. Yet there had been something different in her approach, no recognition in her eyes, just genuine concern as she insisted on checking the tire herself, her practiced movements speaking of years of experience that had been too proud to acknowledge. His own legal team shifted nervously beside him as Sarah began her testimony, their carefully crafted defense strategy now entirely dependent on the words of a waitress who had never asked for anything in return, not even when the death threats started appearing, not when her daughter's school had received suspicious calls, not when her father's repair shop had mysteriously lost its insurance coverage, her integrity standing as a stark contrast to the world of corporate manipulation he had inhabited for so long. Marcus watched as Assistant District Attorney Chen guided Sarah through the events of that night, her voice steady as she described the unusual resistance she had felt by loosening the love nuts, the strange marking that had caught her attention in the beam of her flashlight the moment she realized this was no ordinary flat tire, her testimony painting a picture of competence and conviction that made even his most seasoned lawyers exchange impressed glances. The memories of his own arrogance that night made him wince internally, how he had stood impatiently under his umbrella checking emails while she worked in the rain, his irritation at her insistence that something wasn't right, her persistence in calling her father despite his protests, the look of genuine fear in her eyes when she finally understood what she was seeing, and her immediate reaction to protect a complete stranger without thought of reward or recognition. Behind him in the gallery, he could sense the presence of his board members, shareholders, and executives, their whispered conversations carrying undertones of concern about how this testimony would affect the company's stock price, their priorities unchanged even as evidence mounted that their own COO had orchestrated an elaborate murder plot. Marcus found himself wondering when he had become so disconnected from the basic human decency that Sarah had displayed without hesitation. Sarah continued her testimony, describing the specific anomalies she had discovered that night, her knowledge gained from years of working alongside her father in their family garage, flowing naturally as she detailed the sophisticated nature of the sabotage, her words carrying weight not from rehearsal but from genuine expertise that no amount of corporate training could replicate. Marcus noticed several jurors nodding along, clearly impressed by her authentic understanding. The prosecution's evidence photos appeared on the courtroom screens, showing the intricate details Sarah had spotted that night, each image accompanied by her clear explanations of why these modifications would have led to catastrophic failure at high speed. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he realized just how close he had come to death, his survival hanging on the random chance that someone with both the knowledge and the compassion to help had passed by at exactly the right moment. As Sarah described her subsequent actions, calling the police, insisting Marcus not drive the car, her voice never wavered even when recounting the increasing pressure she had faced in the months following her discovery. Marcus found himself admiring her resilience, the same determination that had made her stop on a rainy night, now evident in her composed demeanor before the court despite the high stakes and intense scrutiny. The reality of how different his life could have been without her intervention weighed heavily on Marcus as he listened to her detail the events that had ultimately exposed James Henderson's elaborate scheme, the attempted murder merely the tip of an iceberg of corporate corruption that had festered under his nose for years, his own success and arrogance blinding him to the betrayal of someone he had trusted implicitly. In the defendant's section, James Henderson maintained his practiced smile, but Marcus could see the cracks in his former friend's facade, the slight tremor in his hands, the occasional clenching of his jaw, as Sarah systematically dismantled the careful planning that had gone into the assassination attempt. Her simple act of human kindness having triggered a cascade of revelations that would reshape the corporate landscape and force Marcus to reevaluate everything he had come to believe about success, trust, and the true measure of a person's worth. The courtroom erupted in gasps as the prosecution played enhanced security footage showing Sarah discovering the first anomaly, a hair-thin wire running through the rim of the tire. Her trained mechanics eye-catching what professional investigators had missed, followed by her frantic attempt to stop Marcus from driving away by calling her father, a retired bomb squad expert, for confirmation of her suspicions. The high-definition screens positioned throughout the courtroom displayed multiple angles of the highway security footage, the timestamp showing 11:42 p.m. as Sarah's old Honda Civic pulled up behind Marcus Tesla's hazard lights, the rain creating a hazy glow around both vehicles, while the prosecution team methodically walked the jury through each crucial moment that followed. Their technology expert explaining how they had enhanced the grainy footage to reveal details that would prove crucial to their case. Frame by frame, the video showed Sarah emerging from her car without hesitation, her waitress uniform still visible under her raincoat as she approached the stranded vehicle, the jury watching intently as she knelt beside the flat tire, her experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency, while Marcus stood impatiently nearby. The contrast between their behaviors speaking volumes about the different worlds they inhabited before fate had thrown them together. The footage zoomed in on Sarah's hands as she worked, revealing the moment she first noticed something amiss, her body language shifting from routine assistance to focused concern, the prosecution highlighting how she had immediately reached for her phone to document the suspicious markings before calling her father, her quick thinking preserving crucial evidence that would later become central to their case. Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, providing expert commentary as the video continued playing, explaining how Sarah's background in both mechanical engineering and practical auto repair had created the perfect combination of skills needed to recognize the sophisticated nature of the sabotage. Her testimony reinforced by split-screen comparisons showing similar devices recovered from other crime scenes. The jurors leaned forward as the enhanced audio captured Sarah's increasingly urgent conversation with her father, his expertise as a former bomb squad member, allowing him to recognize the danger from her descriptions alone. Their exchange revealing the growing realization that this was no ordinary mechanical failure, but rather a carefully orchestrated attempt on Marcus' life. The courtroom fell silent as the footage showed Sarah physically placing herself between Marcus and the vehicle, her determination to prevent him from driving evident in her stance despite his visible irritation, the prosecution emphasizing how her actions in those crucial moments had saved not only his life but had preserved the evidence that would ultimately expose the larger conspiracy. James Henderson's lawyer objected repeatedly as the prosecution highlighted specific frames showing the custom modifications to the tire rim alterations that would have been invisible to anyone without Sarah's unique combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience, their objections growing more desperate as each new angle revealed additional evidence of premeditation. The technical expert returned to the stand, walking the jury through the sophisticated nature of the sabotage, explaining how the device had been designed to activate only under specific conditions that would make any resulting accident appear natural. Their testimony, supported by computer simulations showing the catastrophic failure that would have occurred had Sarah not intervened. Additional security footage from different cameras along the highway revealed shadowy figures working on Marcus' car earlier that evening, their movements precise and practiced, the prosecution connecting these images to phone records and GPS data that would later place James Henderson's hired professionals at the scene, their meticulous planning undone by the simple act of human kindness. The jury watched transfixed as the final moments of the footage played, showing the arrival of the police, their initial skepticism turning to grave concern as they examined the evidence. Sarah had discovered the gravity of the situation becoming apparent as more specialized units began arriving at the scene, their presence transforming a routine traffic stop into the beginning of a major criminal investigation. Sarah sat quietly as the footage concluded, her eyes fixed on the screens as they showed her younger self standing in the rain, providing detailed statements to the investigators, her commitment to truth evident even in those early moments of discovery, while behind her Marcus Reynolds finally began to understand the full scope of what she had prevented that night. The prosecution concluded this portion of evidence by highlighting the timestamps showing how quickly Sarah had recognized and responded to the danger, her actions in those critical minutes, demonstrating both expertise and ethical decision making that would ultimately expose years of corporate corruption and attempted murder. The presentation leaving the courtroom in stunned silence as the magnitude of what had almost happened began to sink in. Detective Rodriguez commanded attention at the witness stand, revealing how Sarah's desperate late-night call had triggered the largest corporate fraud investigation in New York history, leading them through a maze of shell companies, offshore accounts, and ultimately to James Henderson, the smirking COO, who had orchestrated not just the assassination attempt, but years of systematic theft from company pension funds. The seasoned detective adjusted her badge as she methodically laid out the investigation timeline, her 20 years of experience evident in every precise detail she shared, describing how Sarah's initial report had seemed routine until the forensic team discovered the sophisticated nature of the sabotage, leading them to dig deeper into similar patterns of corporate violence across the state. Banking records began revealing suspicious transfers that coincided with other mysterious accidents involving high-level executives. The jury scribbled notes frantically as Rodriguez displayed a complex web of financial transactions projected onto the courtroom screens, showing how James Henderson had methodically siphoned millions from employee pension accounts, disguising the theft through a network of fake charities and overseas investments, each transaction carefully timed to avoid detection by routine audits. Her testimony revealing how the attempted murder of Marcus Reynolds was meant to cover up these massive financial crimes. Images of offshore bank statements flashed across the screens, showing deposits to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Dubai, all traced back to shell companies controlled by Henderson, the detective explaining how they had connected each transaction to suspicious deaths or near-fatal accidents involving corporate whistleblowers over the past decade, the pattern becoming clear as they overlaid the dates of financial transfers with incident reports. The courtroom atmosphere grew tenser as Rodriguez detailed how their investigation had uncovered a hidden office maintained by Henderson in a low-profile building across town, where they discovered detailed surveillance logs of Marcus Reynolds' daily routines, annotated maps showing his regular travel routes, and most damning of all, receipts for payments to known criminal organizations specializing in vehicle sabotage, their evidence painting a picture of long-term premeditation. Sarah watched from her seat as the detective described finding encrypted emails between Henderson and various conspirators, discussing multiple failed attempts to eliminate Marcus before the flat tire incident, each message revealing growing frustration with Marcus' increasing scrutiny of company finances, the decision to tamper with his car coming only after other subtle methods had failed to silence his questions about discrepancies in the pension fund. Rodriguez's voice remained steady as she revealed how the investigation had led to the discovery of hidden cameras in Marcus' office placed there by Henderson to monitor his activities, financial documents showing systematic embezzlements spanning nearly a decade, and a private ledger detailing payoffs to various accomplices within the company structure, each piece of evidence strengthening the connection between the financial crimes and the attempted murder. The prosecution presented telephone records showing a spike in communications between Henderson and known criminal elements in the weeks leading up to the tie incident, the detective explaining how they had tracked the movements of hired professionals using cell tower data surveillance footage and witness statements, creating a comprehensive timeline of the assassination attempt that had only failed due to Sarah's unexpected intervention. Marcus Reynolds sat straighter in his chair as Rodriguez described, finding evidence that Henderson had been monitoring his growing suspicions about the pension fund discrepancies, the investigation revealing how close Marcus had come to uncovering the fraud on his own before Henderson had decided to silence him permanently, the revelation causing several board members in the gallery to shift uncomfortably as they realized their own oversight had nearly cost their CEO his life. The detective concluded her testimony by presenting evidence of similar sabotage attempts on other corporate vehicles, all traced back to the same criminal organization hired by Henderson, her careful investigation revealing a pattern of elimination, targeting anyone who threatened to expose the massive financial fraud that had been funding Henderson's lavish lifestyle for years, the scope of his crimes extending far beyond the attempted murder of Marcus Reynolds. As Rodriguez stepped down from the witness stand, her final statements outlined how Sarah's intervention had not only saved Marcus' life, but had unwittingly protected countless others who might have fallen victim to Henderson's desperate attempts to maintain his scheme. The ripple effects of her simple act of kindness that rainy night, continuing to expose layers of corruption that had remained hidden for years. The prosecution team exchanged confident glances as the star witness concluded her testimony, the mountain of evidence she had presented transforming what might have appeared as a simple attempted murder case into one of the most significant corporate fraud exposures in recent history. While in his seat, James Henderson finally lost his composed demeanor, the weight of his exposed crimes visible in his slumped shoulders and nervous glances toward the exit. The jury leaned forward, collectively holding their breath, as Sarah demonstrated using the actual damaged tire how she had recognized the sophisticated device designed to trigger a catastrophic failure at high speed, her hands trembling as she explained how her childhood spent in her father's repair shop had taught her to spot the telltale signs of deliberate sabotage that would have looked like a tragic accident to the untrained eye. Sarah held the modified tire rim under the bright courtroom lights, her fingers tracing the nearly invisible modifications that had caught her attention that rainy night, explaining how years of working alongside her father had trained her to notice even the smallest irregularities in automotive parts, her voice growing stronger as she detailed the technical aspects of the sabotage device, her expertise evident in every precise movement and explanation. The prosecution had arranged a comparison display showing a normal tire alongside the sabotaged one, allowing Sarah to point out the crucial differences that had aroused her suspicion. Her testimony, peppered with references to her formal engineering education and practical experience, as she explained how the device was designed to trigger only under specific conditions, meant to ensure Marcus would be traveling at high speed when the failure occurred. Memories of her father's lessons echoed in her mind as she demonstrated the exact angle at which she had first noticed the anomaly, describing how the rainwater had caught the light in an unusual way, revealing the hidden modifications. Her explanation, accompanied by technical diagrams showing how the device would have caused a catastrophic failure of multiple vehicle systems, simultaneously making any investigation likely to conclude driver error or mechanical failure. The evidence table before her displayed the components recovered from the tire, each piece meticulously labeled and documented as Sarah explained the function of each modification, her hands steady now as she showed how the seemingly random scratches on the rim actually formed part of a sophisticated trigger mechanism designed to activate under specific conditions. Her testimony transforming complex engineering concepts into terms the jury could easily understand. Expert witnesses from the FBI sat in the gallery nodding in approval as Sarah detailed how her background in both practical mechanics and engineering theory had allowed her to recognize the dangerous modifications. Her testimony, supported by their own analysis, confirming that the device represented a level of sophistication rarely seen outside of professional sabotage operations. The jury appeared captivated as Sarah recreated her movements from that night, showing how she had initially approached the tie expecting a routine change, only to discover the first signs of tampering. Her demonstration, revealing how each small detail she noticed had contributed to her growing certainty that something was seriously wrong. Her actions that night proved to be not just helpful but life-saving. Members of the automotive forensics team watched intently as Sarah explained how the device would have caused multiple systems to fail simultaneously. Her understanding of vehicle mechanics, allowing her to paint a clear picture of the catastrophic chain of events that would have followed, making any resulting crash appear as nothing more than a tragic accident. Her testimony strengthening the prosecution's case with each detailed explanation. Sarah paused briefly as she reached the point in her demonstration where she had realized the true nature of the danger, her voice softening as she recalled the moment. She knew she had to prevent Marcus from driving the vehicle at any cost. Her quick thinking and determination that night, standing in stark contrast to the calculated madness represented by the sabotaged tire before her. The courtroom remained silent as Sarah concluded her technical demonstration by explaining how the device had been specifically calibrated to Marcus' driving habits. Her analysis revealing how the perpetrators had studied their target extensively, timing the failure to occur at the precise moment when investigation would be most difficult and survival least likely. James Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Sarah detailed how the sabotage would have been virtually undetectable after the fact, her testimony systematically dismantling any possibility that the modifications could have been accidental or the result of normal wear and tear. Each point she made adding another layer to the mountain of evidence against him. The prosecution team watched with satisfaction as Sarah connected the technical aspects of the sabotage to the broader conspiracy, her clear explanations helping to bridge the gap between the physical evidence and the financial crimes. Detective Rodriguez had outlined her testimony, providing the crucial link that tied all aspects of the case together. Legal observers in the gallery furiously took notes as Sarah concluded her demonstration. Her combination of technical knowledge, practical experience, and clear communication having transformed complex engineering concepts into compelling testimony that even those without mechanical backgrounds could understand and appreciate the gravity of the attempted crime. Audible murmurs filled the courtroom as evidence revealed the chilling text messages between James Henderson and his hired criminals, discussing how they had studied Marcus' route, knowing his pride would prevent him from calling his usual car service for a flat tire. Their perfect plan derailed by the one variable they couldn't control: basic human kindness. The prosecution projected a series of encrypted messages onto the courtroom screens, their tech expert explaining how they had recovered these communications from Henderson's supposedly secure private server, each message revealing new layers of premeditation and calculated malice as Henderson and his conspirators discussed the optimal location and timing for their assassination attempt. Digital forensics expert Amanda Chen took the stand, walking the jury through the timeline of communications, showing how Henderson had meticulously planned every detail, starting with surveillance of Marcus' daily routine months before the attempt, the messages revealing how they'd identified his predictable behavior of refusing assistance from his regular drivers whenever minor issues arose, seeing this pride as their perfect opportunity. The jury visibly recoiled as particularly damning messages appeared on screen, showing Henderson discussing with his hired professionals how they had tested the sabotage device multiple times, ensuring it would activate only under specific conditions. Their clinical discussion of potential failure scenarios and contingency plans, demonstrating a level of planning that transformed the attempted murder from a crime of opportunity into a carefully orchestrated assassination attempt. Text exchanges between Henderson and the sabotage team detailed their surveillance of Marcus, revealing how they had studied his driving patterns for weeks, choosing the precise location where he would be most vulnerable. Their messages showing increasing excitement as they refined their plan, never considering the possibility that someone like Sarah would stop to help. The prosecution highlighted messages from the night of the attempt, showing real-time updates between the conspirators as they monitored Marcus' journey. Their confidence growing as everything proceeded according to plan, until Sarah's unexpected arrival threw their carefully laid scheme into chaos, their subsequent panic evident in increasingly frantic exchanges as they realized their opportunity was slipping away. Chen methodically presented evidence showing how Henderson had used sophisticated encryption and anonymous messaging services to communicate with his criminal contacts, the very complexity of these security measures serving as evidence of his awareness of the crimes he was orchestrating. Their decryption, revealing a web of connections to other suspicious accidents involving corporate executives. The courtroom fell silent as messages appeared showing Henderson discussing contingency plans for dealing with any potential witnesses, their casual consideration of additional murders, revealing the true depth of his moral bankruptcy, while in the gallery several jurors cast worried glances towards Sarah, understanding now the full scope of danger she had unknowingly faced. Financial records interwoven with the text messages showed payments flowing through elaborate networks of shell companies, each transaction corresponding to specific stages of the assassination plot, the prosecution demonstrating how Henderson had used corporate funds to finance his scheme while maintaining plausible deniability. Messages between Henderson and his personal assistant revealed his growing paranoia about Marcus' increasing scrutiny of company finances, their exchanges showing how the decision to eliminate Marcus had come only after other attempts to hide the massive pension fund fraud had failed, their desperation growing as Marcus got closer to discovering the truth. The prosecution team displayed a particularly damning series of messages showing Henderson celebrating prematurely with his conspirators as they watched Marcus pull over with a flat tire, their confidence in their perfect plan evident in their exchanges until Sarah's arrival transformed their moment of triumph into one of increasing panic and ultimately failure. Evidence recovered from Henderson's private office revealed detailed notes about Marcus' schedule, his habits, and his likely reactions to various scenarios, the level of surveillance and planning documented in these materials supporting the prosecution's assertion that this had been a long-planned and carefully orchestrated murder attempt. The jury watched intently as the final series of messages from that night appeared, showing the increasing desperation of the conspirators as they realized their plan had failed, their subsequent attempts to cover their tracks proving futile against the evidence Sarah had unknowingly preserved through her quick thinking and attention to detail. Chen concluded her testimony by presenting a comprehensive timeline combining the text messages, financial records, and surveillance data, showing how Henderson had orchestrated every aspect of the attempt while maintaining his outward appearance as a trusted colleague and friend, the betrayal evident in every carefully planned detail. The courtroom remained hushed as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear through these communications, the intersection of corporate greed, professional assassination, and pure chance illustrated in stark detail, while Marcus Reynolds sat quietly absorbing the reality of how close his trusted colleague had come to successfully orchestrating his murder. Sarah fought back tears, describing how in the months following her roadside encounter she had faced harassment, intimidation, and attempts to discredit her character, all while working double shifts to support her young daughter and maintain her engineering scholarship until Marcus, discovering the extent of the conspiracy, had stepped in to ensure her protection. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavy as Sarah recounted the first signs of intimidation that began just days after she had helped Marcus' anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, mysterious figures following her daughter Emma to school, and suspicious men lingering outside her father's auto repair shop, their presence a constant reminder that her simple act of kindness had made her a target. Her voice remained steady as she described how her work schedule at the diner had been disrupted by false complaints to management, mysterious cancellations of her regular customers, and negative online reviews that seemed to appear from nowhere, targeting her specifically by name, while her engineering professors began receiving anonymous emails questioning the authenticity of her work. Sarah detailed the escalating pattern of harassment, explaining how her father's repair shop suddenly lost its insurance coverage, longtime customers abruptly cancelled their contracts, and suspicious accidents began occurring around the property, all carefully orchestrated to appear random, while sending a clear message about the consequences of her continued cooperation with the investigation. The jury listened intently as she described the toll the intimidation had taken on her family. Emma, having nightmares about the strange cars that followed their own, her father installing security cameras around his shop, and Sarah herself struggling to maintain her grades while constantly looking over her shoulder, the strain evident in her voice as she recounted those difficult months. Evidence photos displayed on the courtroom screens showed the progression of harassment: slashed tires on her Honda, broken windows at the repair shop, and threatening messages left on her windshield, each incident carefully designed to pressure her into silence without leaving evidence that could be traced back to the perpetrators. Sarah described how she had been forced to change her daily routines, varying her schedule, finding new routes to work and school, always watching for signs of surveillance, while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. For Emma, her voice catching as she recalled her daughter's birthday party, where only two friends had attended, their parents scared away by the rumors and intimidation. The prosecution presented bank records showing how Sarah's savings had been depleted by unexpected expenses, security system installations, repairs to vandalized property, and lost work hours, her financial situation growing increasingly desperate until Marcus had finally discovered the extent of the harassment campaign being waged against her. Text messages and emails retrieved from James Henderson's devices revealed his direct involvement in orchestrating the intimidation campaign. His instructions to hired thugs, specifically designed to pressure Sarah into recanting her statement or fleeing the jurisdiction without leaving evidence that could be traced back to him. Sarah maintained her composure as she described how local law enforcement initially dismissed her reports of harassment, suggesting she was being paranoid or seeking attention, their attitudes changing only after Marcus' security team provided evidence linking the incidents to known associates of James Henderson. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah recounted the night she discovered her scholarship application had been flagged for review based on anonymous allegations of academic dishonesty. The same evening, she found her father's shop had been vandalized again, the coordinated attacks designed to break her spirit and force her to withdraw from the investigation. Marcus Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Sarah described how his own security team had eventually uncovered the full scope of harassment, tracking the activities back to shell companies controlled by Henderson, their investigation revealing a sophisticated campaign of intimidation that had touched every aspect of her life. Sarah explained how she had continued to attend classes, work her shifts at the diner, and care for Emma despite the constant pressure, her determination to see justice done growing stronger with each attempt to silence her, while the evidence against Henderson and his conspirators continued to mount. The prosecution presented surveillance footage showing hired intimidators following Sarah and Emma, their activities coordinated through encrypted messages that were later traced back to Henderson's personal devices, the systematic nature of the harassment campaign revealing the lengths to which he had gone to protect his criminal enterprise. Throughout her testimony, Sarah emphasized how the support of her family, particularly Emma's unwavering faith and her father's quiet strength, had given her the courage to continue even as the pressure mounted, her voice growing stronger as she described how their love had helped her resist the increasingly aggressive attempts to force her silence. The jury appeared visibly moved as Sarah concluded this portion of her testimony, describing how Marcus' intervention had finally provided the protection and support she needed to stand up against the intimidation, her story highlighting how the combined efforts of law enforcement, corporate security, and her own determination had ultimately preserved the evidence needed to expose the broader conspiracy. The defense team masterfully wove together the strands of evidence, showing surveillance photos of Henderson meeting with known criminals, bank transfers disguised as charitable donations, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation where he boasted about how foolproof his plan was, failing to realize his own assistant had begun recording their interactions out of growing moral concern. Lead prosecutor Alexandra Martinez presented a series of surveillance photographs taken over 6 months, showing Henderson meeting with various criminal elements in upscale restaurants, private clubs, and secluded parking garages, each image time-stamped and geotagged, providing irrefutable evidence of his direct involvement in planning the assassination attempt. Financial analyst Thomas Chen took the stand, methodically walking the jury through complex banking records that revealed how Henderson had funneled millions through a network of fake charities, his expertise helping to demonstrate how these seemingly legitimate organizations had served as fronts for paying professional criminals while simultaneously embezzling from company pension funds. The courtroom grew tense as Henderson's former executive assistant Maria Ramirez approached the witness stand, clutching a small digital recorder in her trembling hands, her testimony revealing how she had begun documenting her boss's suspicious behavior after overhearing conversations that raised serious ethical concerns about his activities. Ramirez described in detail how she had witnessed Henderson growing increasingly paranoid in the months leading up to the assassination attempt, his behavior becoming more erratic as Marcus Reynolds began asking questions about discrepancies in the pension fund accounts, her concerns eventually compelling her to start secretly recalling their interactions. The prosecution played selected audio clips from these recordings, Henderson's voice filling the courtroom as he bragged about his foolproof plan to eliminate Marcus, the careless way he discussed the planned murder, revealing a level of premeditation that left no doubt about his intentions, while several jurors visibly recoiled at the casual cruelty in his tone. Security camera footage from the corporate offices showed Henderson meeting with various suspicious individuals in the weeks leading up to the attempt, their movements through the building tracked by timestamps that corresponded perfectly with large cash withdrawals from his network of fraudulent charitable organizations. Forensic accountant Judge Patricia Wong presented detailed analysis of the money trail, showing how Henderson had systematically drained the company pension fund over years using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide his theft, her testimony revealing how the attempted murder of Marcus had been meant to prevent the discovery of this massive financial fraud. The jury watched intently as evidence photos showed the various locations where Henderson had met with his criminal contacts, each meeting place chosen specifically to avoid surveillance, yet captured by hidden cameras installed by FBI agents who had been monitoring his activities as part of a broader investigation into corporate fraud. Text messages recovered from Henderson's encrypted devices revealed conversations with multiple criminal organizations as he shopped around for the most professional team to carry out the assassination, his messages showing how he had specifically sought experts in making murders appear as accidents. The prosecution team displayed evidence of how Henderson had created elaborate cover stories for each suspicious meeting, maintaining a calendar of fake business appointments and charitable events designed to provide alibis for his criminal activities, his attention to detail ultimately providing investigators with a comprehensive record of his movements. Maria Ramirez returned to the stand describing how she had witnessed Henderson becoming increasingly confident as his plan progressed, his boasts about its foolproof nature growing more frequent until Sarah Miller's unexpected intervention had thrown everything into chaos, her recordings capturing his growing panic as the scheme unraveled. Bank records showed how Henderson had immediately begun liquidating assets and transferring funds offshore in the days following the failed attempt, his desperate efforts to hide his wealth providing investigators with additional evidence of his guilt while creating a clear financial trail for prosecutors to follow. The defense team watched helplessly as their carefully constructed alternate theories crumbled under the weight of overwhelming evidence, each new piece of testimony adding another layer of proof to the prosecution's case, while Henderson sat motionless, his former confidence replaced by visible despair. Surveillance experts testified about the sophisticated methods Henderson had used to cover his tracks, their testimony revealing how his very efforts to avoid detection had created patterns that allowed investigators to track his movements and connections with unprecedented precision. The prosecution concluded this portion of evidence by presenting a comprehensive timeline that combined all elements of their case, The financial records, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and recorded conversations, creating an undeniable picture of guilt that left little room for alternative explanations. Throughout the presentation, Marcus Reynolds remained focused on Sarah, her quiet strength, as she watched her testimony being validated by mountains of evidence, serving as a powerful reminder of how close he had come to becoming another statistic in Henderson's ruthless pursuit of wealth and power. Time seemed to freeze in courtroom 401 as the jury foreman stood, Sarah gripping the edge of her seat, Marcus Reynolds for once showing genuine emotion, and James Henderson finally losing his composed figure, while 12 citizens prepared to deliver justice in a case that proved how the smallest acts of kindness could shatter the grandest criminal conspiracies and connect lives in ways no one could predict. Judge Catherine Martinez called for order as the jury filed back into the courtroom after 3 days of deliberation, their faces unreadable as they took their seats. While the packed gallery fell into an anticipatory silence, the weight of months of testimony, evidence, and revelation hanging heavy in the air as the culmination of this extraordinary case approached. Sarah felt her father's reassuring hand on her shoulder as she watched the jury foreman hand the verdict to the bailiff, her mind racing through the events that had led to this moment, from that rainy night on the highway to the months of harassment, the long hours of testimony, and the overwhelming evidence that had exposed one of the largest corporate conspiracies in New York history. Marcus Reynolds sat perfectly still at the defense table, his usual corporate armor stripped away by the gravity of the moment, his eyes fixed on the jury as Judge Martinez unfolded the paper containing their decision, while behind him James Henderson had finally dropped all pretense of confidence, his face ashen as he awaited the verdict that would determine his fate. The prosecution team, led by Alexandra Martinez, maintained their professional composure, though their eyes reflected the culmination of months of careful preparation, thousands of hours of investigation, and the relentless pursuit of justice that had brought them to this decisive moment. Judge Martinez cleared her throat as she prepared to read the verdict, the rustling of reporters' notebooks and the soft whir of courtroom cameras providing the only sound in the otherwise silent chamber, while Sarah unconsciously reached for Emma's hand, drawing strength from her daughter's presence. The first guilty verdict for attempted murder in the first degree echoed through the courtroom, followed by consecutive guilty verdicts for conspiracy, embezzlement, fraud, witness intimidation, and numerous other charges, each pronouncement driving home the magnitude of Henderson's crimes and the sophistication of his criminal enterprise. Henderson slumped visibly with each guilty verdict, his carefully constructed world of power, privilege, and corruption crumbling around him as the jury methodically confirmed his guilt on all counts, while his defense team sat motionless, their expensive legal strategies having proved useless against the mountain of evidence and testimony. Sarah felt tears of relief rolling down her cheeks as the final verdict was read, her father's grip on her shoulder tightening, while Emma hugged her mother tightly, their small family unit having weathered months of pressure and intimidation to see justice finally served. The gallery erupted in murmurs as Judge Martinez began reading the sentencing recommendations, the combined weight of multiple felony convictions ensuring that James Henderson would spend the remainder of his life in prison, while his vast network of criminal enterprises and stolen wealth would be dismantled and recovered. Marcus Reynolds turned to face Sarah, his expression conveying a depth of gratitude that transcended their different backgrounds and social stations, her simple act of kindness having not only saved his life but exposed a criminal conspiracy that had threatened the financial security of thousands of employees. Detective Rodriguez smiled quietly from her position near the prosecution table, knowing that this case would redefine corporate criminal investigations while establishing new protocols for protecting whistleblowers and Good Samaritans who found themselves unexpectedly drawn into complex criminal conspiracies. Judge Martinez called for order one final time as she prepared to formally sentence Henderson, her years of experience evident in her measured tone as she described how his crimes had not only threatened lives but had betrayed the trust of countless employees whose pensions he had attempted to steal.